In the Season 2 finale of Severance, Drummond gives us a mission statement.
We commit this animal to Kier in his eternal war against pain.
We've seen Gemma enter testing rooms having to do with typical fears or discomforts. Flying, writing thank you notes.
I'll write you a thank you note.
Hate writing thank you notes.
The dentist. The Severance procedure, it seems, is primed to be marketed not just for Lumon employees, but as the antidote to any painful or uncomfortable experience.
Mark will benefit from the world you're siring. Kier will take away all his pain, just as Kier has taken away yours.
Don't like something? Just opt out. We see it already with the birthing cabins. In the second episode of Season 1, there's an ominous throwaway line that refers to Jaime Egan wanting to sever kids, and in the finale of Season 1, he talks about severing the whole world.
I remember you said to me, "It's so pretty, Daddy. Everybody in the whole world should get one." They will.
To what end? We can surmise a few reasons. The Egans having their own duplicitous motivations, like creating an endless supply of free exploitative labor and cult members, perhaps. But there's also potentially a sincere belief in the marketed mission: to eradicate pain and discomfort. On paper, and without thinking about it too much, this doesn't sound too bad. Who wouldn't want to avoid pain? After all, we avoid pain all the time with anesthesia for surgeries or dental procedures. And there's an argument to be made about equally intense psychological distress that serves no real purpose, that could or should be similarly avoided. And people do try to numb and opt out of emotional pain with all sorts of behaviors or substances. So, for the sake of argument, let's try taking this claim at face value. Lumon wants to end suffering. After all, the principles of Kier include benevolence. But already, this leaves us skeptical. Because despite this, the current patriarch, Jaime Egan, doesn't really seem to embody this principle. Neither does Lumon, for that matter. James' daughter Helena is cruel, which Helly, her non-Egan conditioned self, never was. Ergo, we can surmise that her cruelty was taught. And Lumon, we see, passively condescends at best, and also traps and intentionally harms. So, we have a few potential explanations for this seeming contradiction. Either A, the principles are a load of shit and they don't actually believe in them. B, Jaime is a shitty Egan. Or C, Kier et al. Defines benevolence totally differently. I'm inclined towards the final option. After all, terms like benevolence are malleable and to a degree subjective, and it's completely possible and even common for people to do harm unto others while stating or even truly believing that it is legitimately for their own good. And this is certainly not out of the realm of possibility for Lumon.
A life at Lumon is protected from such things. And I think a great potential response to that from all of you is gratitude.
So what's the problem? Isn't eradicating pain a good thing? Well, it just depends on what kind of life we want to live. Because it's not that discomfort or even suffering is morally righteous either. It's just that it sometimes happens, and it allows us to learn and develop. The spectrum of the human experience, anger, sadness, frustration, boredom, these are all messages to understand the experience we're having. And maybe, arguably, there's some of them that could be foregone with no downside. Not every unpleasant experience is a lesson. But detaching ourselves from everything that's uncomfortable is not just a great way to prevent us from growing, ever, but also a great way to go numb. The question is, who would we be if we did this? What would we lose? Learning how to move through discomfort is how we get to know ourselves. Being able to experience and process discomfort allows you to also build inner strength and a belief in your own resilience. You don't grow by doing the same thing over and over. Okay, pardon if this is a bit of a Jim Bro moment.
My delts are embarrassingly good today.
But In strength training, there's principles of progressive overload and training close to failure. That is, and this may seem really obvious, but if you want to be able to move more weight, you have to gradually increase the challenge over time, moving more weight or moving it for more reps as you go. And that in order for your muscles to grow, you have to get a little uncomfortable. If you go to the gym and only lift things until they still feel easy, you're never going to get stronger. On a basic level, pain is also a signal. It's a signal both of change and also of what to stay away from. Our hand hurts when we touch the stove, and so we learn not to touch the hot stove. Remove the memory of that signal, and we lack the full scope of information about our surroundings or the consequences to our actions.
Well, every time you find yourself here, it's because you chose to come back.
Without full information, we lose the ability to make as informed choices. The other reality is that experiences are often mixed. Very rarely are we just sitting in one emotional experience and nothing else. We feel anxious but also excited. Something positive happens at the same time as something really negative or uncomfortable. Because of this, it's not as though you can just pick experiences and emotions out like raisins from a cookie. The experience is the cookie, the whole thing. Then there's also the matter of other people, of connection. Overcoming challenges, especially together, also brings you closer and builds empathy for the humanity of other people. That's not to say that we have to literally share an identical experience with someone in order to empathize with them, but if we happen to have had a similar unpleasant experience, we can more viscerally put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And most of all, I think, you have to be able to experience change. You know when you feel time passing because the seasons are changing? The world looks different. The air smells different. The innies can't even see seasons. They don't know any other temperature other than the one inside the building. The overarching theme with each of these points is that, to some degree, life is about contrast. Again, this isn't to go to the other extreme and say that all suffering is noble or just a route for character building. But there is a degree of discomfort that connects us to the present. Like any emotion, it's a signal, and often a signal of change. When you can feel the world changing around you, you're aware, you're present, and you're able to recognize change within yourself. You know when you experience a song or the smell of a certain food, and it takes you back not just to the place you were, but to the person you were and how you were feeling the first time you experienced it. Think about the relief of a hot shower after a cold day, a glass of water after being thirsty. There's a line between suffering and just the natural ebb and flow and occasional discomfort of living. Something that would get lost in this kind of pathological desire to fix and trim and optimize. To some extent, I can't argue for wanting to opt out of genuinely painful experiences. Maybe something so awful that you think that even the memory simply doesn't serve you. And maybe that's a personal call. And to a degree, we already do that. We take ibuprofen rather than power through a headache. We, thank God, use anesthetic during surgery. And how many of us have been too sad or anxious to do anything but sleep just so we can not feel for a bit? But there is a difference between that and opting out of entire experiences of your life. And the human impulse to avoid can also grow. If you can avoid going to the dentist, writing thank you cards, why stop there? Avoid the first few extremely painful weeks of a breakup. Avoid processing a difficult conversation with a loved one. The thing about doing the hard things is, it's hard. Oftentimes our impulse is not to do it. That's the point. But building a meaningful life and a relationship with yourself is about sometimes being beholden to more than just your immediate desire for comfort above all else. And without fetishizing pain, there is something to be said for how embracing change and discomfort can also make you more grateful and appreciative of the positive. Hello, this is me editing. This is something that I wasn't sure whether or not to add. I didn't know if it was too personal or unnecessary, so I will try to keep it brief. As I wrote this and was thinking about these hypotheticals in this sci-fi world, I also thought about it in practice. About a year and a half ago, one of my best friends passed away. He was one of my favorite people I've ever met. So, I posed the question to myself. Would I, given the choice, eliminate the feeling of the pain at the time and just skip it? And then I realized that at the time, I was kind of forced to, temporarily, in a way. The day that I found out about my friend, I had been unemployed for months, and I had just gotten a message about a scheduled job interview a few days later. At first, I considered canceling, and then someone convinced me to keep the appointment. So, to focus on what came next, I put my feelings away, in a little box, just for a few days. Because I was so afraid to fall apart, and I couldn't afford to fall apart. Then, about a week later, when the time came that I could lift the lid off of that box, nothing happened. And maybe it was because I had shoved things down, or maybe that would have happened anyway. Grief is weird. Grief is like that. But when I didn't break down immediately, it scared me. I thought something was terribly wrong. But of course, eventually, it did come, and it was like a tidal wave. So, if I could keep the knowledge of what happened, but put the actual horrible feelings away, when I asked myself this, it was an instant and obvious no. Every feeling that I experienced, devastating as it was, all of it, still connected me to my friend. In a way, it honored him. It also ended up connecting me to others in ways that I didn't expect.
But what is grief? If not love, persevering?
Overstated as this line may be, I remember thinking how it never felt more true. It was all the love I had for him, continuously finding it in new and unexpected places. And I can't think of a world where I'd ever give that up. And you know what? Someone might say, okay, so what? That's the way they want to live. So, it's less of a moral good or bad, even though in this story Lumon is obviously unethical and abusive, and more about what kind of people and what kind of world does this philosophy create. This mindset creates a world built around comfort to the exclusion of all else, to the point of stagnation and numbness.
She feels nothing.
It's beautiful.
A world stripped of contrast. And we can see something of an emotional and visual representation in the lack of humanity that permeates every part of Lumon, with its cold, bright white lights. And all through the Egan home, there's no personality. This world, ostensibly perfectly balanced, or at least in pursuit of that balance, not a temper out of place. Lumon's flagship Severance program is based on the splintering of people's humanity for the most convenient outcome. To this end, Lumon preys on people's pain and desperation, on people willing to slice their own humanity and commodify themselves for whatever reasons: financial insecurity, feelings of inadequacy, emotional avoidance, with the promise that it will benefit them personally. Even Helena does it in service of her father's company. The Severance premise, according to Lumon, posits the idea that there are more and less convenient parts of us. Could there be a you who is the most productive worker if you're never worried or anxious about anything in your personal life? A fight with a friend or a partner. People take their work home with them, but they also take themselves to work. Ergo, ostensibly, the best worker is the one who isn't distracted by outside life. And the Severance procedure asks, why not go further? How about a worker who didn't even have one? It's marketed as a convenience for you, but the point is, Lumon wants you to be less of a person, with less experience and desires. And Kier's crusade for this world without pain is an extension of this idea, of people sectioning off parts of themselves, limiting their range of experiences. And we can gain some insight by looking into the philosophy that they espouse themselves, Kier's guiding philosophy for an ideal life. That is, taming his so-called 4 tempers, 4 qualities that he says make up the core of a person, existing in a unique ratio for each of us. The key word here is taming. It evokes this idea of balance, almost meditative, that there's nothing wrong with any traits or feelings so long as they do not overtake any others. And notably, of the 4 tempers, frolic, dread, malice, and woe, 3 out of 4 are negative. And frolic is also something to be tamed, to be overcome. Because the crusade against pain isn't about creating a more joyful world, but a dispassionate one.
Please try to enjoy each fact equally, and not show preference for any over the others.
Within Lumon, everyone seems beholden to this restraint. No one really seems to be allowed to show genuine feelings, not even those in charge. Cobell seems sincere only when she loses it, and she eventually gets fired. When Milchik or Natalie show their displeasure, it's even-toned to the point of eeriness. Kier's whole idea of balancing the tempers isn't a bad one. But this philosophy itself, ironically, contains an imbalance, and being so focused on living the quantitatively best life rather than simply living it. Severance is far from the first piece of media to contend with this question. What is the cost of eliminating pain and strife? Is there a value to the imperfections of the human experience? There are other stories that tackle this, where some person or entity says that a life without pain is better for one flawed reason or another, and each time, the rebuttal points to something intrinsic that is lost in that pursuit. Choice, identity, meaning.
I offered paradise! You chose this!
Because that's what you took away from us. Choice.
There is beauty in imperfections. They made you who you are.
And also, frankly, Lumon's promise of a world without pain is kind of impossible. In this hypothetical scenario that Lumon is striving for, where the bulk of your memories are just life's highlight reel, and another version of you holding nothing but the unpleasant leftovers wouldn't erase the experience. It would continue to sit in your brain, in your body, experienced by the version of you that can't remember anything else, and with no context to process it.
You carry the hurt with you. You feel it down there too. You just don't know what it is.
You're not eradicating pain. You can't erase an experience and its effect on us. You can just try to bury the memory, shove it in a box, and pretend that gets rid of it. Thematically, this is fascinating, but also on a practical level regarding the Severance chip, I wonder how much of this subconscious, unprocessed physiological strain a person could take. And who's to say it would even work? That you could just shove certain experiences in a corner of your mind, have your body and your nervous system still experience it, but then forget it. You would still experience the effects subconsciously. You just wouldn't know what it is, and wouldn't be able to learn from it or reflect on it. And then, on a practical level, for your highlight reel memory, if you severed yourself from every painful or uncomfortable situation, how much life would you cut down? After all, how did Mark and Gemma meet? Donating blood. An experience that some people, myself included, maybe would prefer to skip. The flashback in Season 2, Episode 7, Chikai Bardo, engages with this hypothetical head-on by showing us memories of a full life. We see the not dead wife montage, and as we might expect, it is idyllic and a bit romanticized. But then, it's also grounded. They argue. Mark misses moments of intimacy. They experience loss. It is painful. It is uncomfortable. Part of this is also that we're seeing it from Mark's perspective. Mark is reflecting on the events, and when someone's gone, you think of all the ways you could have been better, all the things you could have done differently.
You think about all the things you do, and all the ways you change to get that person back. You'd drink less, you'd listen more.
But in this flashback, we see that this is not a perfect love or a perfect life without conflict or misunderstanding. And so what? It's also real. Real enough for Mark to fight for. Real enough that it's Gemma's lifeline during years imprisoned. That's the stuff interpersonal relationships are made of. And often in those misunderstandings and conflicts is where people grow together, get to know each other more. Mark and Gemma's relationship didn't need to be perfect for us to know that it was beautiful and made life worth living. We see moments of disconnection, moments where Mark misses Gemma's emotional cues. This happens. Relationships are bright and exciting when they begin, and it's easy to make that person a priority. But as time wears on, month after year, the novelty and excitement can wear off in favor of the mundane grind of every day. It's easy, however good our intentions, to take that routine for granted. That love that was once a hit of excitement and felt like music can become background noise. And part of that love that grows is that quiet comfort, that steady pulse in our lives. But the other side of that is that comfort can bleed into complacency. And I really treasured how they showed that, to be honest, about the Mark Gemma flashback. I think it could have been really easy to portray it as this overly idealized backdrop to highlight how miserable and how terrible Mark's life is now, to show such a crazy contrast to the loveless world of Lumon. And it did. But it also didn't misrepresent what real relationships are. Romantic and otherwise. We miss each other's cues sometimes. We misunderstand each other. It's a given that we love each other, so we don't think to say it. Because, above all, human relationships, the thing that make a life worth living, for worse and for better, are messy. And Lumon, it seems, is in pursuit of a kind of pathological order, eradicating messiness, the beautiful and the terrible, dispassionate, perfect, hollow.
So look, there is a life to be had here, Helly.
And if this weren't enough, the Innie's plotline itself contradicts this idea. Lumon's first tier of segmenting life into parts is the idea of neatly separating out the grueling tedium of work, creating a version of a person living a life that is almost entirely made up of boredom, discomfort, and abuse. And yet,
there is a life to be had here, Helly.
A life to be had?
The line is a bit tongue-in-cheek because we know that lacking true freedom, this is, in some ways, as Helly puts it, half a life. And yet,
They give us half a life and think we won't fight for it.
it is still worth living. It is still, from these people's own perspectives, something well worth fighting for. Again, it's not about glorifying or romanticizing struggle either. There's a middle ground here, between that and extreme avoidance. Everything is a matter of degrees. The grief exists because the love did. There is debilitating emotional pain, and at the same time, there's a kind of sadness that is precious because it connects you to love. Fear can be excessive and disproportionate, but it's also a message, and it helps keep us safe. The solution to unbalanced tempers isn't to aim for perfect neutrality, but to do our best and also embrace the flux of our experiences. We don't need to dim the emotional color palette of our lives. Our emotional experience isn't meant to be ideal. It's just meant to be felt.